And as we make a transition, we're going to hear from Tammy Little and her crew at the Assessor's office. So ready to do that. Thank you. Thank you for being here today. We have 45 minutes scheduled for your part of today's budget hearing. So what we've been trying to do, Tammy, is to keep it about half and half with presentation and then Q&A from the budget committee. So about 20, 25 minutes.
Hey, thank you.
You're
Good
welcome.
morning, Chair Parks Committee members. I'm Tammy Little, the Clackamas County Assessor, and I've also included our two managers in our department, as other presenters have done.
Is that not on? I didn't think, yeah.
Thank
There we
you.
Yeah, make sure, just keep all your microphones on, and that way we don't have to, you don't have to remember to do them off and on.
Thank you. I've included them to participate in the presentation and help answer questions. There are also some other members of our great staff in the audience, and we are pleased to be here today to present our budget for the Department of Assessment and Taxation. So I want to just point out the picture on our cover page is from our new aerial imagery. This is a subdivision in Happy Valley, one of the fastest growing city in the state. And I want to just point out what's great about this is the typical ortho flyover would have just shown the black box or the square of the roof line. And here we can actually see these are homes and not wonder what the building is. So wanted to point that out.
How close those are together. This is amazing.
Right. So the mission of the Department of Assessment and Taxation, we administer state property tax laws to taxpayers and taxing districts. We have many customers. And we work so that they can have confidence in their tax system and receive the highest quality customer service. We are responsible to equitably value all taxable property in the county and the discovery of all new construction, new inventory. We process an enormous amount of work for the limited number of staff that we have. We provide services not only to the county, but to a total of 133 taxing districts that provide vital services to county residents, including fire districts, water districts, cities, schools, the county. We process voter-approved money measures, district boundary changes. We calculate, we receive budgets from the districts and calculate ad valorem taxes under the state property tax laws, including measures 5 and 50. We collect and distribute tax dollars in 1819. That certified amount was $852 million, and we are collected at 97% to date. We provide property owners with value dispute resolution, value correction services, exemption and deferral, qualifications and eligibility determinations. And proudly I say that our department has had a long-standing commitment to providing excellent customer service. It is a culture in our department that the former two assessors established, and we continue that today. So our strategic goals, we continue to work on them in the following ways. We have continued, we have more work to do, but we continue to add property record information online. We have a lot of requests from the public for that information and from other county departments and jurisdictions as well. So we've made some good progress in the past year on that. We continue to work at capturing electronical data for our commercial, industrial, and multifamily homes. We have made many efficiencies in our department, but the complexities of those properties, they still are paper records, and we have to find them. And so we're working to digitize all of that and get that information into our CAMA, or computer-assisted mass appraisal system, for some improved efficiencies in the future. We also have made great strides this year. We're just setting up this program with the new aerial imagery to work to reduce the amount of property not on the tax rolls. And the example that I'll give is the first week of our training in April with the new aerial imagery, we discovered 2 homes and a commercial building that had not been on the tax roll. The homes were actually built in the late 90s, and they had not been on the tax roll.
Wow.
So it's already evident that this is going to be a very valuable resource to us. We will be adding the additional taxes. Statute allows us, directs us actually, not allows, to correct the current year and 5 prior. So those dollars will all be extended to this coming tax roll in November of 2019. And then going forward, the annual tax on those properties will be part of the tax roll. So it's very important work. It's been an area that we've had lots of unmet demand that we need to work on, and we feel good about the progress we're making. In connection with that, one of our strategic goals was to share data and information and resources with not only other county departments, but external agencies as well. And that imagery that we purchased, outside of maybe a minimal licensing fee, can be shared within the county and with jurisdictions like fire districts, cities, other people that use that imagery. We invited and had, I think, 67 participants join us in the training, and we have now got commitment from the sheriff, 911, DTD, and the city of Molalla is very interested. Fire district out in Canby is very interested. So in this year, because the payment is part of our budget already, we're allowing those jurisdictions that have decided to partner with us in cost sharing going forward to have the availability to use the imagery now rather than waiting. And we're working with Laurel to come up with a cost modeling, a cost sharing model going forward. And then we continue our efforts to maintain a well-qualified, competent, and have our organization well-staffed. We have a great team. They work really hard. We produce a lot of work with a limited staff, and we continue to have some turnover, and those types of things are challenging. So our budget. Our budget has increased. Those costs are driven primarily by allocations and personnel costs, as other departments have faced that same thing. Our materials and services are managed at a very conservative level. We were able to make some reductions in those areas, in the materials and services. The revenues that we have coming in are property declass amounts, where if forest land or farmland, as an example, is returned to a market value, that rollback tax, that's added to the general fund. And then, of course, the big number in that is the CAFA grant. That is a grant provided by the state. It's primarily, or it consists of a portion of delinquent interest on, or interest on delinquent property taxes, as well as some of the recording fees. Each county submits a grant application, and based on numbers of staff and the workload that you have and the success of your department, we're allotted a certain amount. It is projected that it will increase slightly this year. However, the amount that was projected for 2018-19 fell just slightly short of that projection. So the slight increase is not as tempered a little bit. We kept that number flat in our budget, knowing that it may not increase too much. So for budget reductions, we were able to trim just about $38,000 from our materials and services, and it doesn't impact any of our service delivery. We did reduce our contracted appraisal service. At the time that we put all of this together, appeals appeared to be a little lower. They were flat at BOPTA this year, however, have increased at the magistrate level. They've doubled. Those numbers just came in, so it could be an impact that we feel from that reduction. We also took a reduction in judgments because we just looked at the past 3 years and felt that we can make that reduction based on what's been happening. We've also seen some efficiencies in the use of the Department of Administrative Services at the state with mailing our property tax statements, so we've seen some reductions in postage. And we did return the facilities allocated cost reduction. The next comment I put on only because, I mean, I wouldn't have added that except that it was a big part of our presentation last year. We fall well below the Department of Revenue staffing models. In our appraisal division, we are 11 appraisers short of their staffing model, and the discussion last year was the need for more staff. And because of the constraints with the budget this year, we did not ask for those additional FTE. We did, however, decide that it was critical to request a senior property appraiser in order to facilitate this new aerial imagery and this project to add this, our aerial imagery project. And we want to have a successful use of the capital funds that we got approval for last year. And if we don't manage that project and keep it in the forefront, we're worried that we wouldn't see it to its full utilization. We did review the possibility of reclassifying in order to fill this need with a vacant position that we had, but the impact, of that may not only impede our ability to accurately complete the tax roll, but it may also affect the amount. It might jeopardize some of the grant funding that we receive from the state, so that was a big concern. And we met with finance and discussed all of this and with Gary. It is expected that the CAFA grant money will be $1.4 million, which is the same amount as was estimated last year. The estimated salary for the senior appraiser that we're asking for, fully loaded, is at $100,000. We also want to point out that we received some additional funds this year for a grant through the ORMAP project at the state. We doubled it from $15,000 to $30,000. We've recently hired 2 temps to help us with another strategic goal, which is digitizing all of our appraisal maps. The Department of Revenue and other counties are always looking for ways. It seems like every year in the legislature there's a way to provide funding for assessment and tax programs. And House Bill 2104, if passed, it would potentially add additional money in 2020. They are considering reducing the 3% discount to 2% for business personal property and other businesses, including public utilities. In our line of business or program for administration, it's the Office of the Assessor. We work to operate within 95% of our adopted budget. We have been working for the last 5 years, actually, on a succession plan. Our numbers are improving. We had 4 years ago, 100% of our managers were within 1 to 3 years, I believe, of retirement, and they have all retired except for me. And we're replacing them. We've had other retirements in our staff as well. And so we've been in a cycle of new leadership, new staff, lots of training going on. And it just occurred to me, I apologize, but since my mic wasn't on, I don't think I introduced Lynn Longfellow. She's our appraisal manager. And this is Bronson Rueda, our deputy assessor. I apologize, I meant to do that, and the inefficiencies, we calculate a dollar amount per account, and that stays fairly stable. But you can see that the tax generated per dollar of budgeted expenditure is dropping, and that's because our revenues are you know, our costs are far exceeding. So that number has declined, has dropped. I got my brain off track, sorry. So the other thing I want to point out is during the annual legislative sessions, it's continually an ongoing process where we provide, it's a challenge to help citizens understand the tax system and for us to effectively administer it. We work to help taxing districts. We meet with them regularly to help them and with citizens. We often get calls and we meet with them. Other things, the legislative sessions, they take sometimes a significant amount of time and resource because we're asked to provide data or to help out in some way. We do remain committed, as I said earlier, to collaborating with other departments and jurisdictions. We think we have a good example of that in sharing our aerial imagery. In our program valuation, property valuation, we consistently are valuing property at 100% of market value, which is a statutory requirement. We do that by studying sales throughout the entire county. We're deep into that process right now. It's a lengthy process. It's how we establish market value each year in the county, and it is a Department of Revenue oversight process. We submit our plan to them in advance. We submit our results after analyzing, and we either answer more questions or we ultimately do get our approval from them to move forward. Resource limitations and increased real estate activity have continued to impact our ability to direct additional resources to the commercial industrial data project I mentioned earlier. But we are working toward that, and we did make some progress this past year. We began the progress first time, and then we had some vacancies occur and slowed it down a little bit, but we are working at it. In our value adjustment program, as I said earlier, the Board of Property Tax Appeals under the clerk remained stable. It increased slightly, and we are also expecting to be able to continue to make progress on the omitted property and picking up the value not on the tax roll. And although the acceleration of growth has slightly slowed, it's now just in the single digits instead of, we had 3 years in double-digit growth. Now this will be the second year we've dropped down below the double digits. But we still see a consistent increase in our workload. And when we actually did these numbers, it appeared they might be slightly lower than last year, but the new estimate has come in and they're on pace. In value adjustment, one of the big issues is appeal management. It can be a very high use of resources, and the legal complexity of these appeals and the complexity of the properties under appeal make this a complicated part of our work. We require assistance regularly from county council, and much of our staff time is spent on this. In tax revenue, I always think this is a great statistic, and it holds true year after year. The November 15th due date, we are able to process all payments, and we've collected 87% of the tax dollars by the end of November. And as I said earlier, 97% of the tax dollars for 18-19, the $852 million, will be collected by the end of June. I think we're at 97 at this point. Our number of credit, debit, and e-check online payment postings continually increase year by year, so people do like that. Annexations and withdrawals were completed timely and accurately this year. We processed levy requirements for 133 taxing districts, and we mailed 179, almost 180,000 tax statements.
I'd like to just point out that you have about 5 more minutes of presentation time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In our property records, they process a lot of work. I'll just hit the highlights. Over 17,000 ownership transfers in this past year. So thank you, because I want to get to our key performance measures. One being the importance of the omitted property, which I've already discussed. Resource limitations and the active real estate market have slowed down. Again, I've already spoke to this. We've made the significant improvement or progress in meeting our goal of sharing data and collaborating. And I also want to mention that we first did our performance clackamas draft in 2015, and we, at the beginning of the next fiscal year in July, we're going to revise our plan. It needs updating and address, so we're going to work on that. I just included this because I've talked about the workload that we have, and last year I presented an article that had 4 cities in Clackamas County that were in the top 10 list for fastest growing cities in Oregon. 3 of them were top 3, but Oregon City now has made this list. Molalla dropped a little bit, and Sandy went up a little bit. But Clackamas still has 5 out of, or this year has 5, 1 more than last, of the top 10 fastest growing cities, and we have the top 3. And that slide is a picture of Happy Valley.
Still can't figure out why they call it a valley, because it's always a hill.
Unhappy Valley. Emerging issues for us. One of the things I've talked several times about is the integration of our GIS mapping data with our CAMA system. And we had a great start with purchasing the aerial imagery, and we are now ready to utilize and make these efficiencies. In our annual ratio study is the study I just described of studying sales so that we can adjust all property in the county to market value. And we're in the middle of that, and we're looking toward ways in the future that this imagery is going to help us. Due to the growth of the county, costs that have been outpacing revenues and a lack of resources, we believe that we need to continue to find new ways to complete our work and create an annual or accurate tax roll each year. The aerial imagery is a great start, but it's really going to be technology that helps us going forward. We're never going to be able to hire enough staff to go out in the field and measure houses and value all the new construction and property. Another issue that has emerged, I mentioned it last year, and that's the replacement of our software. It's 21 years old, and we've discovered that it cannot easily be integrated with GIS. So we've been making it work, and we're utilizing it as well as we can. But there are some efficiencies that we're seeing other counties who are further along in their software purchases. And so, we're looking toward that in the future. Another emerging issue is that our current vendor, U.S. Bank, that allows us to process credit card payments online, as you mentioned. They also provide a lockbox service for us when we receive payments. Our payments are mailed to, it's on a Marine Drive, I believe. It's to their lockbox, and they open, process, and produce a text file for us to load into the system. It's a valuable service, saves us lots of money, lots of time. That's why we're able to deposit the money quickly and post out by the end of November. They are no longer going to provide that service. So we're working with the treasurer. He's working with Marion County and Washington County and other counties doing an RFP and looking at the next best solution that we can find. And then the last emerging issue is that due to the importance of this integration of our GIS data with our CAMA system, we've discovered that having a supervisor on our cadastral team has become critical. We've seen our neighboring counties, Multnomah and Washington, already take that step, and so we're looking toward that in the future. So, sorry I talked too long.
Oh, you're great. Thank you. No, you're Right on
So,
time.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of commissioners with questions. I have one quick one before that. So with your new system where you're able to find properties that haven't been on the roll, I guess I have a two-part question. So you can find, if I remember correctly, when we initiated that, when we put that in the budget, it not only could determine, oh, there's a property we don't have, but also it was looking for, oh, this property now has 3 buildings on it, or, a big
Correct.
addition, or an ADU, or something that
Correct.
wasn't also on the rolls. Is that correct?
That is correct. So part of the purchase was for a product called Change Finder or Change Detection. So we were able to, at no charge, access some imagery from 2015 from some insurance flyovers. We did pay a fee in our contract for them to draw, and they manually do this actually. There's some AI, but they have a group of people back in New York that actually draw a footprint of the building over it. And then the imagery that they took for us last October and November, they did that same thing. And then they compare those over each other. I believe we had 18,000 mismatches. Now, many of those can be ruled out. Of course, we've picked up many of those. But in setting up criteria of what do I want to look at in between these images to find this, and that's what one of our appraisers did. He just began to look during the training, and he was able to find a vacant property and at one of our accounts that did not have an improvement value on it. So there's a number of ways to do that.
Well, it sounds like it's working quite well. So when you find a property like the ones that you were talking about in the beginning, what's the process? What happens? Let's say I own a house and it hasn't been on the rolls. So what can I expect? I mean, mine is, I'm paying my taxes, big taxes, you know. Yeah, but I heard you say there's 5 years that you need to pay for back taxes plus then, moving forward. So
Correct.
what can the public expect? How would that actually function?
So it's a total of 6 years because it's the current year we're in
Year
plus
plus
5.
five,
So
yeah.
when we find that, there's a couple of answers I'll add here. There can be many reasons. Maybe we didn't get a copy of the permit to know even to go to that property, or perhaps we had a human error on our side. So there could be different reasons for that. But when we discover it, of course, we value the property, we calculate the tax going back the 6 years, and then we send, by statute, we're required to send a notice to the property owner, and we give them a certain amount of time. It's 20 days for them to get in touch with us to dispute that value. At that point, then, we correct the tax roll. We notify them again that we will be extending that additional tax for collection in the fall, and then we give them their appeal rights on to the state. But you can imagine it is a difficult process.
So does a person have to pay all 6 years at once, or are there payment plans, or?
The full amount is extended to the next general tax roll, and they are allowed to pay with discount, the 3% discount. But if they don't, then it accrues interest just like the rest of the tax.
Right.
What the statutes changed about 10 years ago is they used to put those dollar amounts on the year in which the omission occurred, and so they would have a number of years of delinquent interest right away if they didn't pay it. Now, in full, that amount is extended to the upcoming subsequent year.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Commissioner Savas, then Commissioner Bernard. Are you done?
You asked
Never
my
mind.
questions.
Okay. And then Commissioner Schrader. Thank you.
So, thank you, Tammy. Great presentation. I was looking at your slide on page 5 of your handout, which had the key performance measures, and you have the 97% of tax dollars are collected by the end of the fiscal year. That's your target. I was just wondering how we compare with other counties, and if the bar is set high or high enough. And I just see you've got 97% across the board. And I just did some quick math, and if math is right, that's about $26 million, 3%. If it was collected, it'd be an additional 26. I'm sure we can't collect 100%. I
Right.
know that's not possible, but how do we compare?
I believe we're right in line with where everyone is. I don't have the actual numbers from them, but just in discussions as we, meet at our conferences and talk, and I've talked with Multnomah County and Washington County. We actually had a district meeting recently, so some of this discussion occurred. I don't have their actual percentages, but we all are very close in that range. We're right there.
Because that would be, I think, if my, just recalling maybe what the average might be for property tax collected, every dollar of property tax collected, I think the county gets 25% or 20% in general fund of that division of all those taxes.
County gets about 18 cents of every dollar, but then there are dollars that go to parks separate from that, and a couple other, the
Right.
library is separate.
Yeah, so that, that would be, about $5 million additional revenue, but again, we're not gonna get 100% that
Right.
we would have today, in the book. So, are we, I guess that uncollectible, I know a lot of people say, that I've talked to, say, how come you're not going, this property is foreclosed on for back taxes. Let's just say it was a manufactured home, it was the most recent one that was brought to my attention. $15,000, and they're tearing it down. And now there's no value to that because it was on the structure. It was not really on the land. And therefore that's permanently lost. Is that really worth pursuing? Because I guess it's out there that don't even bother paying the tax assessor. And, once they demolish it or move out, it's uncollectible. And it seems to me that that's almost kind of flies in the face of what the mission of the tax assessors is, at least by state law,
Right.
what the mission is.
Well, it's unfortunate, and it does occur. The statutes on personal property are different for collecting than they are on real property. On real property, we can foreclose. On personal property, we have to warrant and then seize. So there's a huge expense if we were to seize a manufactured home. Say in a park, we may be liable for the space rent. We may be liable to move it. Just a number of different things that come along with that. What we do is we pursue the collections, and we work with park owners to help them know who is current, who is not, because that's typically one of their requirements is to have their taxes paid. We also work with property owners to help them be on a payment plan, and I will say that they really sometimes they can only pay $25. But they really try to follow the payment plan that we set them up on. And of course, we try to set a plan so that they can be paid off before the next tax is there, but some of these people just really can't. So it would be, as the tax collector, it would be very helpful if the legislature provided us with better tools in order to collect these taxes.
Right. And the ones that are on real property, that property is actually lien for those back taxes. So we actually ultimately one day will collect those back taxes. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. If they own both the land and the manufactured home, then that is accurate.
Commissioner Bernard?
I never made this suggestion. Let's say Paul did. And that is maybe a Saturday appraiser on site. I did a remodel, and I kept getting things on my doorknob that I wasn't there, and some people can never be there, frankly. And I know that on a remodel, you probably want to go into the house.
Right.
So, I mean, it might make sense to look at somebody who does that on Saturdays. But I see you do physical appraisals fairly. I mean, 97%, I think I saw in a 6-year period.
Actually, we have not seen 93% of the properties in the last 6 years. The majority of accounts haven't been visited in the past 20 years. When Measure 50 came into effect, that 6-year cycle was taken away. And so without the resources to go out and physically inspect property, that's one reason our inventory is not where it should be.
Well, it would make sense then to have additional personnel to go out and do that physical appraisal. And that's something I think that we should put on the parking lot to make sure that you have, because the more people you appraise, the more money you get. It sounds like a solid investment. I don't want to obviously do this in this year's budget, but
Right, that's where we were anticipating going because, property tax revenues are 72% of the general fund. And we know that that plan to get on a 6 or even an 8-year cycle is very critical. And so we want to work toward that. But each year, with the resources that we have, we're producing an accurate, timely tax roll, which without doing that is also very costly.
And
So-
also with the growth, like you showed on the thing, you probably do those when you coordinate with the planning department. There's an estimate of the cost of the remodel or the home, I assume. And you coordinate with our planning department to get that information, and those you've got to do to get them on the tax rolls at all. But all those that we haven't looked at, it's really something that we ought to prioritize in getting you adequate staff to do those reappraisals.
Lynn, would you like to talk about reappraisal and making appointments for inspections?
Sure. A couple of things for the two omitted houses that we did find with this aerial imagery. The one house that was built in 1995, it's over in the Sunnyside area, right in plain sight. It's in a market area with 6,000 accounts, 6,000 dwellings, and we have not reappraised that area since 1991.
Wow.
So that is an area that our aerial imagery covered. The aerial imagery with this change detection, Tammy mentioned the 2015 flight, only covers about a quarter, maybe slightly more than a quarter of the county. So
Thank
we
you.
didn't get this change detection countywide. And actually, we have 118,000 rows of changes that change detection found.
I said 18.
Yes, it's
Oh.
118,000. And a lot of those changes we already have on the roll from new construction and permits we've gone out on. But so we need to look at that data smartly and determine what we don't have on the roll.
I don't want to repeat anything we've already done.
Exactly.
So usually a bank, when you get a loan, they put money in escrow for taxes.
A lot of omitted property comes to our attention because mortgage companies or lenders call when the property is in escrow and say, why are the taxes so cheap? We do find out about omitted property that way sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes after the sale, comparing it to our value,
Right.
we discover omitted property as well on a remodel.
But
All I
there's,
can say is, why didn't you forget my taxes?
Doesn't work
re-
that way.
And to speak to an inspection, we often we set appointments with people because we understand that it's not easy to necessarily be there. So our appraisers can meet your, when you would be available.
Can they go on your property if you're not there and walk around the house? And for example, I built a barn and I know they wanted to see that too. Can they walk on your property?
you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes,
We-
our policy is our appraisers do go on the property unless it's posted as no trespassing. If it's posted as no trespassing, if the door of the home is readily visible and easy direct access, we'll go to the door, knock on the door. If no one's home, we leave our door hanger and we leave the property.
So I gotta
If it-
get my no trespass sign up.
And a lot of people do. So that's why we do not get on a lot of properties.
Yeah, well, thank you for the work you do. I know it's not always, it's probably semi-dangerous in some cases.
Imagine it might be.
Well, safety is always
Number
our
one.
utmost concern, and that message is loud and clear with our appraisers. Be aware of their surroundings. Always be safe.
Thank you.
And it's important to note, for taxpayers that getting the value of their home correct in that first year is very important. And it's about fairness and equity for everyone. And no one wants to realize that something was missed and they have this delinquent bill.
That's for sure.
That would not be fun. Commissioner Schrader, and then Commissioner Savas and Ms. Coldwell.
So I have a question about what we're now calling accessory dwelling units. Are they considered ADUs only if they have a bathroom and a kitchen associated with it? And if so, if they don't, are they assessed at different values if it happens to be I have, for example, someone can kind of sleep in this little back area. I was one of those folks who evidently that wasn't on the tax rolls. It doesn't have a bathroom. It doesn't have a kitchen. Does the assessment change based on whether or not, I mean, what do you really call an ADU, and how does that change how you
If you would
assess the?
answer, Lynn?
Yeah.
Sure. You know, an accessory dwelling unit is probably more of a planning decision whether or not it can be utilized for a full-time dwelling.
Right.
What we value is, so for instance, if there is an outbuilding and it has finish area in it, we will value the finish area in the building. If it doesn't have a bathroom, we won't value a bathroom. So, so we value what's there and use the cost factors to arrive at the real market value. But as far as us determining the legality of whether or not it meets the definition of an ADU and can be lived in full-time, that would be a planning decision.
Yeah, but it seems to me it would change the value of the property as well
Well-
in terms of
Well,
how
it
you.
can,
Yeah,
because if
Yeah.
we're using dwelling cost factors versus, say, a pole building, cost factors that has interior finish.
okay.
But we would value it
Good.
appropriately for what it is.
Correct.
Yeah,
makes
because
sense.
I'm not going to give out an address, but I do have a neighbor that just evidently turned what was an unfinished piece into 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. And again, I'm wondering if that increases, more than likely would increase the value of what the taxation would be versus.
It would increase the value, yes.
Okay, I won't give out the address right now. You'll have to, you
Well, if
you
they
know,
Find it with your little,
but you know where I live, so.
drones.
just let me know. I don't.
okay.
And said, we,
thank you.
we get permits from the county and all the city jurisdictions, and that process actually has become very efficient. It's electronic now, and that's another way that we're
Yeah.
able to find these.
Commissioner Savas?
I was just, with regard to the recommended parking lot issue about looking at older properties, I mean, or properties for more current valuation, I don't think it would be beneficial on some accounts where you have a property where the assessed value is, dramatically lower than the appraised value, right? Because all you're doing is changing the appraised value, but you're only taxing at the lower assessed value. So by the time that really comes online, or you actually realize a benefit, could be a decade or more, 2 decades away before you actually, that 3% actually catches up. So my question is that if you were, or when you do this, do you target areas that have a narrower delta between the assessed and the appraised, or the market value? Let's say appraised, the market value.
We definitely look at where the areas of most importance are for us to go out and do reappraisal. I'm going to let Lynn speak to this too, but market value is very important, even though there is that large gap, because as we saw in the recent recession, market value declined, and about 30% of our real property, they began paying tax on that market value. So it is very important. It also sets the limitation of tax under Measure 5. So it's critical, but I think Lynn can add to that.
Yeah, on omitted property, if it's not on the roll, it is added to the assessed value as well as the real market value.
Mhm.
So the 3 properties that we mentioned, the real market value added to the roll was 3.4 million, and the assessed value was 2.3 million
There you go.
and change. So it did increase that taxable value as well. And with reappraisal, we would see that as well on omitted property. The other piece is getting our values in equity and ensuring that they, everyone is paying the correct amount and their valuations are correct. Because there's also Measure 5 compression, which is based upon real market value, not assessed value.
Right.
So there is
makes sense.
benefit in that reappraisal and real market value, and often affects the assessed value as well.
My only point of raising that was that going after where there's a return on the effort. I
Right,
won't say investment, but return on on the effort.
right.
It will be a great return if our market values are as correct as possible
There you go.
as because history will repeat itself. Hopefully not too much of a dip, but
Yeah, Brian mentioned a recession, hopefully brief, but,
Yes.
that could impact market value.
and it could impact the number of appeals that we get.
Thank you. Ms. Coldwell?
Thank you. I know that Multnomah County purchased recently a new software system. I didn't know if that ever was functioning and online. It took, I know, several years to make it work with Oregon's property tax laws, but do you know, was that ever successfully launched?
It is successful. They have been online with the, let's see, it was last year that they went online with the appraisal or the CAMA side, and they went online at tax time in November last year with tax revenue. And it is a successful project. No conversion is ever easy. They've had, the pains of that, but fortunately, they were successful, which is great because it was actually the conversion before that they had more trouble with. So Washington County is currently under contract and in conversion going live next year with the same vendor.
Okay, I was going to ask if that could give you some possibilities for going forward with a new system for Clackamas.
It's certainly, in the process, it's certainly one we would take a look at. Our product has been a really good, obviously, it's been working and functioning for 21 years, so it's actually been working really well. We just have passed that tipping point where we need the newer technology in order to.
And probably lots of work offline that your staff is
We
doing.
do. We have a lot of offline processes.
All right, thank you.
Do you know the
Thank you.
cost of that software that they paid?
I do not.
That's probably another thing we gotta talk about is,
It's one of
Soft-
our emerging issues, and it was last year as well.
Software, did you say?
yeah, I think we should.
Appraisal software?
Not only audit software on the parking lot, but also the overall software, which we've been talking about, we're still working on, but it's also millions. And
Right.
it's
It
a
is.
huge impact.
So would you like to, are we adding that to the parking lot? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we should add all those software updates and include the overall. We use what's the one we use now?
PeopleSoft.
PeopleSoft, yeah.
Right. Oh, I remember that name, yes.
Yeah. We're done.
Seeing no more questions, we thank you so much for taking the time to come today. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. We
and
appreciate all of
Thanks for
you.
the work you're doing and keep finding those places that aren't on the rules. We need a lot of those. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a recess for lunch, and we will reconvene at 1 o'clock. So we are.